There is a canyon in the desert of southern Jordan. To reach the ancient city inside it, you walk through a narrow gorge called the Sick, a crack in the sandstone mountains, walls up to 80 meters high, in places only 3 meters wide, over a kilometer long. And then the gorge opens, and you see it, a facade carved directly into the rose-red cliff face, 40 meters tall, columns and pediments and urns and gods all cut from solid rock. The Bedouin who lived near it for centuries believed the urn at the top contained a pharaoh's treasure, and you can still see the bullet holes in the stone from generations of people shooting at it hoping to release the gold. The urn is solid stone. There was never any treasure inside. The treasure was the city around it, the water systems and temples and tombs and colonnaded streets and theaters cut from the sandstone of a desert basin that gets less than 4 inches of rain per year. A city that sustained 30,000 people with no natural water supply using engineering we still do not fully understand. The civilization that built it is called the Nabataeans. They were Arab traders from the desert who turned geography into a monopoly. Every caravan carrying frankincense from southern Arabia to the temples of Rome, every merchant moving myrrh or spices or silk from the east toward the Mediterranean had to pass through Nabataean territory. Through the desert routes the Nabataeans controlled, through the wells and way stations the Nabataeans maintained, past the armed escorts the Nabataeans provided. And the Nabataeans taxed every bit of it. Their capital, Petra, the Rock, became one of the wealthiest cities in the ancient world, a place where, according to a Greek geographer who visited, even the kings served their guests personally at dinner, and where the wealth was so visible it shocked Mediterranean visitors who were used to wealthy cities. The Nabataeans built temples, carved tombs, constructed colonnaded streets, raised an amphitheater that seats 8,000, and cut their entire water supply system out of solid rock. And then, in the year 106 CE, the Nabataean kingdom ceased to exist. Not because it was conquered in a dramatic war, not because its capital was sacked, not because its last king died defending his throne. The kingdom simply became a Roman province, the province of Arabia Petraea, with no recorded battle, no recorded siege, no army destroyed in the field. The transition was so quiet that historians still debate whether the last Nabataean king arranged his own kingdom's absorption into Rome. Petra continued to exist as a city. People continued to live there. Coins were still minted. The Nabataean people did not disappear. They dissolved. Over the following centuries, they merged into the Roman provincial population, then into the Byzantine population, then into the Arab Islamic population. The name Nabataean faded. The civilization that built the most photographed ancient monument on Earth passed out of history so gently that most people who have seen photographs of the Treasury of Petra cannot name the civilization that carved it. The Nabataeans appear in the historical record for the first time in 312 BCE, one of Alexander the Great's successors. Antigonus, who was fighting over the remnants of Alexander's empire, decided to conquer and plunder the Arab traders he had heard about, living in the desert around a great rock. He sent his general Demetrius with a force of 4,000 infantry and 600 cavalry to take them by surprise. The Nabataeans were warned in advance. They sent their families and flocks to the top of the rock and waited. When Demetrius arrived, they had nothing for him to plunder. He made camp, received a Nabataean embassy, accepted some gifts, and went home. Antigonus sent Demetrius back a second time with a larger force. The Nabataeans fought this time, using a guerrilla ambush in the night, killing most of the attackers. Antigonus never came back. This is what we know of the Nabataeans before they became a major power. When the Macedonian generals came for them, they won. What made the Nabataeans rich was not land or armies. It was position. The ancient world burned an extraordinary amount of incense. Frankincense and myrrh came almost exclusively from the southern Arabian Peninsula, modern Oman and Yemen, and from the Horn of Africa. The temples of Rome, Egypt, Greece, and the Near East burned thousands of tons of it every year. Strabo says Rome consumed 3,000 tons of frankincense per year alone. This was not a niche luxury. It was a massive industry, and almost all of it had to travel north and west through the desert, along routes that passed through the territory the Nabataeans controlled. The Nabataeans did not just trade, they taxed transit. Every caravan paid to pass. Every merchant needed Nabataean water and Nabataean guides and Nabataean protection. The Nabataeans were the middlemen who could not be bypassed. The Incense Route, the main overland trade road from southern Arabia to the Mediterranean, ran for roughly 2,500 kilometers. It passed through Nabataean-controlled territory for most of its length. Along this route, the Nabataeans built a series of way stations, desert towns with cisterns, caravanserais, wells, and markets that made the journey survivable. In the Negev desert alone, the remains of 5 major Nabataean caravan cities have been excavated: Avdot, Mamshit, Halutza, Shivta, Nizana. These are not outposts. They are full cities, with temples and churches and residential quarters built in the desert to service the trade. The Nabataeans were not just traders. They were infrastructure builders, sustaining the network that made long-distance commerce possible. The goods that moved through Nabataean territory were not only frankincense and myrrh. Spices from India, pepper, cinnamon, cardamom, arrived at Red Sea ports and were redistributed through Nabataean networks. Silk from China moved along the western end of the Silk Road into Nabataean territory. Copper from the Sinai. Balsam from the Dead Sea region. An extremely expensive perfume resin grown almost exclusively in the Jordan Valley area, worth more than its weight in silver, which Nabataean merchants controlled and exported at enormous profit. Gaza wine, the most prestigious wine of the ancient Mediterranean, was redistributed through Nabataean trade. The Nabataean commercial network was a wholesale redistribution system for the luxury goods of the entire ancient world from India to the Atlantic. Petra, Rakhmu in Nabataean, was the center of all of this. To reach it, you had to find it first, which was not easy. The natural basin that contains the city is hidden within a maze of sandstone mountains and accessible primarily through the Syk, the narrow gorge whose walls close so tightly that 2 camels could barely pass each other. This was not accidental. The Nabataeans had a defensible capital that also happened to be perfectly positioned on the junction of multiple trade routes. The approaches could be watched and held by small forces. Raiders who found the entrance anyway faced a kilometer-long corridor of rock before they reached the city. Petra was a fortress disguised as a trading city. The water of Petra is the engineering achievement that still astonishes modern engineers. The city gets less than 100 millimeters of rain per year. Almost nothing by the standards of any city in history. Yet at its peak, it supported 20,000 to 30,000 residents. The Nabataeans achieved this through a system of ceramic pipes, rock-cut channels, dams, settling pools, and cisterns that collected every drop of rainwater from the surrounding mountains, transported water from springs kilometers away, and stored enough to sustain the population through the dry months. The channels were cut into the living rock of the 6 walls. You can still see them. Dams caught the flash floods that roared through the gorge after rainfall. Every surface that could collect water did. The city was essentially a giant water harvesting machine, and the Nabataeans were its engineers. The architecture of Petra is inseparable from the rock it is carved from. Nubian sandstone is not uniform stone. It is layered in extraordinary swirling patterns of red, pink, orange, cream, and purple, each layer reflecting different mineral concentrations laid down millions of years ago. When the Nabataeans carved into it, they did not paint their monuments. The rock itself provided the color. The facades of Petra's carved tombs are natural art, each one unique because the rock itself is unique. The Nabataeans combined this natural canvas with Hellenistic architectural forms. The columns and pediments and cornices of the Greek and then Roman world adapted to a context that no Greek or Roman architect would have attempted. The result is buildings that exist nowhere else on Earth. Classical facades embedded in colored cliffs. The Treasury. Al-Khazna in Arabic is the most famous of Petra's carved monuments, visible at the end of the Syk. Scholars believe it was a royal tomb, possibly for the Nabataean king Aretas III or perhaps Aretas IV. The facade is 40 meters high and 28 meters wide, carved into the cliff face in 2 stories, a lower colonnade with 6 Corinthian columns, and an upper level with a central thalos, a round structure, flanked by broken pediments and figures of the goddess Tyche and the Dioscuri. The interior is a single plain room, undecorated, which is all a tomb needs. The elaborate exterior was visible to arriving travelers from the end of the Syk. It was the first thing you saw when you arrived at Petra. It was meant to be seen. Beyond the treasury, the city of Petra spreads through the basin, a colonnaded main street lined with temples and shops. The great Qasr al-Bint temple, one of the few structures built upward rather than carved inward. The amphitheater cut into the hillside. Dozens of carved tombs in the cliffs surrounding the basin. High places of sacrifice on the ridge tops. small shrines and niches cut into rock faces throughout the city. The scale of human labor involved in carving this city from rock is staggering. Unlike a built city, where you construct from materials, Petra was created by subtraction, removing rock until the desired space remained. Every room, every corridor, every column base required cutting away the mountain. The Nabataeans employed this technique across more than 800 individual monuments. The Nabataean kings presided over this wealth from the 1st century BCE. Aretas III, who called himself Philhellene, friend of the Greeks, extended Nabataean control north to Damascus, one of the great cities of the Near East, and minted coins with his own portrait in the Hellenistic style. He was a sophisticated ruler who understood that displaying Greek cultural credentials was useful in the Hellenistic world. He also besieged Jerusalem in 65 BCE at the invitation of one of the warring Hasmonean princes, the first time a Nabataean army engaged directly in the politics of Judea. This involvement would have consequences. It brought the Nabataeans to the attention of the power that was about to reorganize the entire Near East. That power was Rome in the person of Pompey. In 63 BCE, Pompey swept through the Near East in one of the most consequential military campaigns of the ancient world. He took Jerusalem. He reorganized Syria. He established Roman dominance from the Caucasus to the Red Sea. Aretas III, who had been besieging Jerusalem, pulled back quickly and sent envoys. Pompey accepted the submission, demanded and received tribute, and moved on. The Nabataeans were not conquered. They were recognized as a client kingdom within Rome's sphere of influence. They would pay tribute. They would not threaten Roman interests. And in return, they would be left alone to run their trade empire. This arrangement, with variations, would last for nearly a century and a half. The most successful Nabataean king was Aretas IV, who ruled from 9 BCE to 40 CE, a reign of nearly 50 years. He rebuilt and expanded Petra, commissioning the great colonnaded street, the Qasr al-Bint temple, and probably overseeing the construction or major renovation of many of the carved monuments. His coins call him lover of his people and show his portrait alongside that of his wife or mother. He was also a contemporary of Jesus of Nazareth, Herod the Great, with whom he had a hostile relationship because Herod divorced Aretas' daughter to marry Herodias, which Aretas never forgave, and the early Christian movement, and he appears in the New Testament. The reference to Aretas in the New Testament is brief but striking. In the second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 11, verse 32, Paul the Apostle writes, "In Damascus, the governor under King Aretas guarded the city of the Damascenes in order to seize me, but I was let down in a basket through a window in the wall and escaped his hands." This is Paul, the man who would become Christianity's most important theologian, escaping through a window to avoid arrest by an official of the Nabataean king. Aretas IV apparently controlled Damascus briefly, probably a gift from Emperor Caligula around 37 CE. His official was trying to arrest Paul. The connection between the Arab trade kingdom of Petra and the origins of Christianity is oblique but real. The wealth of the Nabataean trade empire at its peak was, by the standards of the ancient world, extraordinary. Strabo describes the Nabataean elites reclining on gold-embroidered couches at dinner, drinking from silver and gold cups served by slaves in silk. The king's banquets featured elaborate entertainment. The women wore gold jewelry. The merchants counted their wealth in thousands of talents. A talent was roughly 26 kilograms of silver. Diodorus Siculus, writing in the 1st century BCE, says the Nabataeans possessed such wealth in gold, silver, and precious goods that it exceeded what any man could count, and all of it flowed through Petra, through the narrow Sikh, past the Treasury, down the colonnaded street, into the warehouses and markets and temples of a city carved from colored rock in the desert. The Nabataeans did not grow this wealth. They built the infrastructure that made other people's wealth flow through them, and kept a portion of everything that passed. The relationship between the Nabataeans and Rome was always complicated by the question of who controlled the desert trade routes. Rome wanted the goods. Rome wanted the routes. Rome did not want to pay Nabataean transit fees forever. Beginning under Augustus, Rome began investing in alternative routes, particularly the direct Red Sea route to India, bypassing the overland caravan routes entirely. The Egyptian port of Berenice on the Red Sea became a major terminus for Indian Ocean trade under Roman administration. Roman ships sailed directly to India and back. This did not immediately destroy the Nabataean system. The overland routes still moved goods, and some categories of goods were better moved overland. But the commercial logic was shifting. The The Nabataeans' position as indispensable middlemen was becoming negotiable. The military dimension of the Roman-Nabataean relationship was illustrated by a spectacular disaster in 26 BCE when Augustus sent his prefect of Egypt, Aelius Gallus, on an expedition to conquer Arabia Felix, the wealthy southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, source of the incense. The Nabataean minister Syllaeus served as guide and advisor to the expedition. The campaign was catastrophic. Disease, poor logistics, and navigation failures killed the majority of the army before it reached its objective. The expedition returned to Egypt having achieved nothing. Ancient sources blamed Syllaeus for deliberately sabotaging the campaign, leading his Roman patrons through the most difficult routes and concealing alternatives. Augustus was furious. Syllaeus was later executed in Rome. Not for this specifically, but for political intrigues involving the Nabataean royal family. The failed expedition demonstrated that Arabia could not be simply conquered. The Herod dimension complicated everything further. Herod the Great, Rome's client king in Judea from 37 BCE to 4 BCE, was one of the most capable and paranoid rulers of the ancient world. He and the Nabataeans had an ongoing hostile relationship. Herod had divorced the daughter of the Nabataean king to marry Herodias' predecessor. The Nabataean minister Syllaeus had attempted to marry Herod's sister Salome, which Herod blocked. After Herod's death, his kingdom was divided among his sons, and the Nabataeans took advantage of the chaos to raid across the frontier. When Aretas IV went to war with Herod Antipas, the Herod who beheaded John the Baptist, he destroyed Herod Antipas's army so comprehensively that many Jews saw it as divine punishment for the execution of John. Through all of this political turbulence, Petra continued to be built. The Nabataeans were not just warriors and traders. They were artists and architects of unusual sophistication. Their pottery was paper-thin, almost translucent when held to light, painted with delicate floral patterns in a style unlike anything produced elsewhere in the ancient Near East. Their metalwork was highly skilled. Their coinage moved through the intricate visual vocabulary of Hellenistic numismatic art. And their script, a fluid, cursive form of Aramaic that they wrote from right to left on parchment and stone and pottery, was beginning to evolve in ways that would prove historically decisive. The Nabataeans were not just a trading civilization. They were a culture. The Nabataean religion involved multiple deities. The most important was Dushara, the lord of the mountain, the chief god of the Nabataeans, associated with the sacred stone and with the rock of Petra itself. Alat was a goddess associated with the planet Venus and with the moon, shared with other Arab traditions. Al-Uzza was another goddess. As the Nabataeans became more Hellenized, their gods were identified with Greek equivalents, Dushara with Dionysus, Alat with Athena. The sacred stones called betyls, rough-hewn blocks or carved faces representing the divine presence, appear throughout Nabataean religious sites. Their gods were not fully anthropomorphic in the Greek sense. They had a distinct visual theology, both abstract and intimate, that expressed a relationship to the rock landscape in which they lived. In 106 CE, the Roman Emperor Trajan incorporated the Nabataean kingdom into the Roman Empire as the province of Arabia Petraea. The governor sent to administer the new province was a man named Cornelius Palma. Ancient sources record no battle, no campaign, no siege. The Nabataean king Rebel II had died, possibly some years before. The exact timing is uncertain. The legion that oversaw the transition, the Legio III Cyrenaica, appears to have marched into the territory without opposition. Trajan celebrated the event with coins minted in Rome bearing the legend Arabia Adquisita, Arabia acquired, not Arabia conquered, not Arabia subdued, Arabia acquired. The language of the Roman coins describing the end of the Nabataean kingdom is the language of a business transaction, not a military triumph. The kingdom had been there. Now it was a province. The people who had lived in it were now Roman provincials. Why did this happen so quietly? The commercial answer is the most straightforward. By 106 CE, the Nabataeans had lost much of what made them strategically indispensable. The Red Sea trade routes were established. Roman merchant ships were sailing directly to India. The caravans still moved, but the Nabataeans no longer had a monopoly on the goods or the routes. Petra was still a wealthy city, but Palmyra, a trading city in the Syrian desert, was growing rapidly and competing for the overland caravan trade. The Nabataean commercial empire was shrinking relative to Roman-controlled alternatives. From Rome's perspective, Annexing a weakened client kingdom that controlled a strategic territory was straightforward administration. The political answer involves the last king, Rebel II, whose coins carry the unusual inscription, "Who brought life and deliverance to his people." This phrase has puzzled historians. One interpretation is that it refers to military victories. Another is that it refers to a transition arrangement, that Rebel negotiated the absorption of his kingdom into Rome as a protection for his people, a way to ensure the Nabataean population's welfare after the commercial empire's decline made independent survival increasingly difficult. Rebel reportedly moved his capital from Petra to Bostra in the north, closer to Rome's Syrian administration. He may have been preparing the ground for a smooth transition. The lack of military resistance when Trajan's forces arrived suggests either that no one was in a position to fight or that no one chose to. The Roman province of Arabia Petraea was a success by Roman administrative standards. Trajan built the Via Nova Traiana, the new road of Trajan, running from Bostra in the north to Aqaba on the Red Sea, a major highway through the former Nabataean territory. Petra remained a functioning city, with new Roman buildings added: a bath complex, a colonnaded street in the Roman style, a temple to the imperial cult. The city was gradually Romanized. Latin inscriptions appeared alongside Nabataean ones. The Nabataean gods were increasingly identified with Roman gods. The Nabataean script began to give way to Greek and Latin for official purposes, but the people remained. The culture remained. Only the political form had changed. The most consequential thing the Nabataeans left behind was not Petra. It was their script, Nabataean Aramaic, the cursive, joined-up script that Nabataean merchants had used to record their transactions, inscribe their tombs, and write their documents, continued to be used and adapted after the political kingdom ended. Over the following 3 to 4 centuries, as the population of the former Nabataean territories continued to write in cursive Aramaic-derived scripts, the letter forms evolved. By the 4th and 5th centuries CE, inscriptions from the region show scripts that look distinctly different from classical Nabataean but recognizably ancestral to what we call Arabic script. The oldest known inscription in a script that can clearly be called Arabic, the Zabad inscription, dates to 512 CE. But the lineage is Nabataean. This means that the Arabic alphabet, the script in which the Quran was written, in which the poetry of the golden age of Islamic civilization was composed, in which 600 million people write today, descends directly from the writing system of the Nabataean traders of Petra. The connection is not symbolic or cultural in a loose sense. It is paleographic and documented. Scholars can trace the evolution of each letter form through intermediate inscriptions across the centuries. The people who carved the Treasury of Petra used a script that, through evolution and adaptation, became the vehicle for one of the most consequential religious and cultural transformations in human history. The Nabataeans disappeared as a political entity. Their writing did not. Petra itself outlasted the Nabataean kingdom by centuries. The city continued under Roman rule, flourished under Byzantine rule. There are Byzantine churches inside Petra with remarkable mosaic floors, and remained inhabited well into the Islamic period. A devastating earthquake in 363 CE damaged much of the built city, destroying or damaging the Roman structures. The carved monuments survived, because rock is harder to damage than built walls. A second major earthquake in 551 CE caused further damage. By the 7th century, when the Islamic conquests reorganized the entire Near East, Petra was becoming a smaller and less important place. The Crusaders briefly built a castle on the high ridge above the city in the 12th century. After the Crusaders left, Petra effectively vanished from the European historical imagination. The Bedouin of the Bedouin tribe continued to live in its cave tombs and know exactly where it was. It was not lost. It was simply not visited by anyone who wrote about it in a language European scholars read. In 1812, a 28-year-old Swiss explorer named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt was traveling through the Near East disguised as an Arab pilgrim, calling himself Ibrahim ibn Abdullah. He had been in the region for years, learning Arabic, studying Islamic law, traveling through Egypt and Syria. He had heard persistent rumors of an extraordinary ancient city hidden in the mountains of southern Jordan. The local people were guarded about it. The site was sacred and they did not want outsiders there. Burckhardt devised a pretext. He told his guide he wanted to make a sacrifice at the tomb of the prophet Aaron, which sat on the high ridge visible from Petra. The guide agreed to take him. Burckhardt walked through the sick, saw the treasury, walked through the city, and understood immediately what he was looking at. He had rediscovered Petra. Burckhardt could not reveal his excitement. He was still pretending to be a Muslim pilgrim, and showing too much scholarly interest in the ruins would expose his disguise and potentially put him in danger. He made brief notes, performed the sacrifice at Aaron's tomb, and left. He died of dysentery in Cairo 5 years later at the age of 32, before he could fully publish his discoveries. But his account reached Europe and caused a sensation. Artists and explorers followed. The British artist David Roberts painted the city in the 1830s in watercolors that became the definitive European image of Petra for a generation. The phrase that would become most associated with Petra came from a sonnet by John William Bergen published in 1845, "A rose-red city half as old as time." The phrase is geologically wrong and historically imprecise, but as evocative descriptions go, it stuck. The rediscovery of Petra raised an obvious question for 19th century scholars: who built this? The Nabataeans were known from scattered references in classical texts, but their civilization was poorly understood and their monuments had never been seen by modern Western scholars. The systematic archaeological investigation of Petra and of Nabataean sites throughout the Negev and Jordan took most of the 20th century to produce a coherent picture. Archaeologists found not just the carved monuments, but the ceramic pipes, the cisterns, the caravan cities, the pottery, the coins, the inscriptions in Nabataean script. Slowly, the picture of what the Nabataeans actually were, Arab traders who turned middleman transit fees into a desert civilization of extraordinary sophistication, came into focus. Today, Petra is one of the most visited archaeological sites in the world. It was named one of the new 7 wonders of the world in a 2007 public vote, which says something about the power of the Treasury's image in the age of photography and film. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, filmed partly in Petra in 1988, introduced the Treasury facade to a global audience who mostly had no idea what they were looking at. The site draws roughly 500,000 visitors per year in normal years, making it the cornerstone of Jordan's tourist economy. The Badul Bedouin, who had lived in the cave tombs for generations, were relocated out of the site in 1985 when it became a national park, a decision that remains contested. Their ancestors had been the custodians of the city for centuries. The Nabataean caravan cities of the Negev desert are less famous than Petra, but equally impressive in their way. Avdot, called Oboda in Greek and Latin, probably named for King Obodas, who was deified there, is a hilltop city in the Israeli Negev with a Nabataean temple, Byzantine churches, extensive wine production facilities, and a sophisticated system of agricultural terraces and runoff channels that turned a desert slope into productive farmland. The Nabataeans developed a form of desert agriculture, collecting runoff from large catchment areas and channeling it to small farmed plots. That was so effective that the abandoned terraces still support plant growth today, 2,000 years after the farmers left. UNESCO recognized the Negev caravan cities as a World Heritage Site in 2005. The question of Nabataean identity, what they were, who they became, is complicated by the gradual nature of their disappearance. They did not vanish as a people. They became Romans. Then they became Byzantine Christians. The churches at Petra with their extraordinary mosaic floors testify to that. Then many became Muslim Arabs. The populations of modern Jordan, the Palestinian territories, and parts of Saudi Arabia and the Sinai include the descendants of Nabataeans, though without a continuous record of that identity, the connection is archaeological rather than ancestral in any traceable sense. What survived most clearly was not ethnic identity but cultural technology, the water engineering knowledge, some agricultural practices, and most consequentially, the script that the Nabataean merchants used to record their transactions. The frankincense trade that funded the Nabataean civilization was itself an extraordinary industry. Frankincense comes from the boswellia tree, which grows in the dry mountains of southern Arabia and the Horn of Africa. Tapping it requires cutting the bark and collecting the resin that seeps out, a process that takes weeks per harvest. Myrrh comes from the Commiphora tree in similar regions. In the ancient world, burning these resins was not a minor ritual flourish. It was the core technology of temple religion. Every Roman temple, every Egyptian shrine, every Greek sanctuary burned frankincense constantly. The smoke was the visible form of communication between the human and divine worlds. This religious demand was so massive and so consistent that it sustained a commercial network spanning 3,000 kilometers of desert for centuries. The Nabataeans did not just benefit from trade. They were sustained by the logic of ancient religion. The Nabataean language itself was an Aramaic dialect. Aramaic was the common language of the Near East from roughly the 6th century BCE onward, spoken from Persia to Egypt. The Nabataeans used it because everyone in their trading network used it, but what many of them spoke at home, scholars now believe, was a form of Arabic, or Proto-Arabic, a language closely related to the Arabic that would emerge as a major literary and religious language in the 7th century CE. The relationship between Nabataean Aramaic writing and spoken Arabic reflects a common pattern in history, a literate commercial class using a prestige language for writing while speaking something different in daily life. When the Nabataean political entity dissolved and the writing conventions loosened, the everyday spoken language, some form of Arabic, began to influence the script, pushing it toward what Arabic script would become. The Treasury of Petra appears on the Jordanian dinar. It has appeared on postage stamps from dozens of countries. It is instantly recognizable to billions of people who have seen it in photographs, films, and travel advertising. And almost none of those people know the name Nabataean, or that the people who carved it were Arab traders who taxed frankincense caravans, built water engineering in a desert, had a king mentioned in the New Testament, and quietly became Roman provincials. The gap between the fame of the monument and the obscurity of the civilization that built it is one of the stranger ironies of historical memory. People know the stone. They don't know the story behind the stone. The Nabataeans flourished for roughly 400 years as a distinct political and commercial entity. In that time, they built a city that still impresses, developed water technology that still functions in traces, created a commercial network that supplied the ancient world's most important luxury goods, and produced a writing system that became one of the most historically consequential scripts ever developed. Their kingdom ended not with a battle, but with a transition. The people continued. The culture transformed. The script evolved. And the city they carved from the rose-red rock of Jordan waited, mostly forgotten by the outside world, for a Swiss explorer in disguise to walk through a narrow gorge and recognize what it was. The Arab empire that built Petra did not dramatically collapse. It was not conquered in a famous battle. There was no last stand, no sacking of the capital, no moment of dramatic defeat to hang a story on. The Nabataean kingdom quietly became a Roman province in the year 106 CE, and the Nabataean people quietly became Romans, then Byzantines, then Muslims, their identity dissolving across centuries rather than ending in a single moment. What they left behind is one of the most beautiful man-made things on earth, a city carved from colored rock in a desert canyon, and a writing system that carries the words of one of the world's great religions. The quiet disappearance of the Nabataeans into Rome was not the end of what they built. It was the beginning of what their building became.